Hey, how you doing? Welcome back. I think I've heard from all of you now, and it sounds like everyone has found a home or a place to stay that's at least safe and hopefully secluded at the moment. And you have a computer and you have internet access, so we're off and running. That's good. So last time we did Stream Ecology Part 1, and I told you about some stream terms and ways of thinking about stream order and things like that. And then we started looking at some stream ecosystem models. We're going to continue that today. So this is Stream Ecology Part 2. And the first time, if you remember, we were looking at these river ecosystem concepts, and there are really three in particular I'm going to focus on. And we spent some time looking at the river continuum concept, which is this big diagram. And I won't go through all that. Again, you can watch the previous video if you want to remind yourself about that. But remember that rivers have three different axes. So there's the longitudinal axis as water flowing through the stream. That's this one. And then there's the lateral axis, which we'll get to next. And then there's the vertical axis as water, surface water and groundwater interact. So pretty clearly the river continuum concept is based on the longitudinal axis because we have this sort of sequence going on as things move down the stream. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that that entire concept is sort of based on longitudinal flow of water and material and energy. The next concept is called the flood pulse concept, and it is much more based on the lateral axis, this one. And so you can see here, we're talking about water flooding the entire riparian corridor and exchanging material and energy with that area. So here are some pictures of that in low flood and high flood areas. So you can see in low flood, there are the fish and other organisms that are sort of crowded in the water column there. And then when flood season comes, the water stretches up into what was formerly upland. We will call that a riparian corridor. And now that is flooded as well. So there's big exchange of nutrients and food and organisms and sediment and energy as those floods advance and recede. So this is a little hard to read. You might have to expand it a little bit, but this just shows how in an area that tends to flood, here's a low flow time of the year. And then as you approach the high flow time of the year and all this area is underwater and then it recedes. So this is sort of an annual cycle. And what you see is a lot of organisms sort of depend on that. Of course, fish, here are fish that are in the river. And when the high flow comes, that is usually their spawning season. So they are spawning and the young are emerging in these flood zones, which support aquatic vegetation when there's water there. This would be the high flood zone here. And so there's a lot of nutrients that are brought from the water up into the upland area or the riparian corridor when that flood happens. Then as the flood recedes, of course, young organisms are taken back into the river, along with all sorts of coarse woody debris and organic matter and detritus and sediment and nutrients that was in the riparian corridor get exchanged back out into the river. So there's this big annual cycle of exchange going from the river to the riparian corridor and then back to the river. And so this is pretty critical in a lot of habitat. Of course, our rivers flood around here, but in some tropical areas, they flood for months at a time, and the flood can be up to 10 meters change in depth. So 10 meters, that's 30 plus feet. We don't have any rivers that do that around here. When our rivers flood, it's usually a few feet change in elevation, unless it's a really bad flood like we just had last week. We had a large flood last week. But in some parts of the world, this flood cycle is really monsoon driven and really sort of defines the whole ecosystem. Imagine if you were to build flood walls along this river and prevent that flood, you would cut off lots of organisms from this exchange of nutrients and area to spawn. So flood pulse concept is really, that's why they sort of color it in this middle one here, really sort of looking at the exchange, the lateral exchange of nutrients and energy. So it's not that one of these is right and the other one's wrong. They're all kind of right, but this one, river continuum, is more longitudinal, and this second one, or the middle one, flood pulse, is more lateral. We're going to look at one more, and really it's combining these last two, but it's this riverine ecosystem synthesis, which has these FPZ, functional process zones. So we'll take a quick look at that. This is attempting to combine all three axes at once. So here's just an elevation map of a river. The different shades of black to white here represent different elevations. And then the colored in areas here are trying to represent different processing of nutrients. And so this model is trying to get at thinking of a river in a patchy sort of way, which usually we think of grassland or forests as having patches. We've talked about that, you know, sort of the shifting mosaic idea. And we don't usually think of rivers doing that, but actually they do. There are small, tiny watersheds. They call these micro watersheds along the river bank, and even out into the river here, you might have some areas that for one reason or another are more productive than others at different times, or there's different nutrients being processed. Maybe a fish just pooped and there's all kinds of nutrients available in one spot, and those spots shift around throughout the river. And there's also a vertical exchange with the groundwater too. So we're using all three axes here, the longitudinal axis and the lateral and the vertical, all are contributing to all these spots that pop up and move around through the river, just like we talked about how patches work in forests. A great diagram to show this, but here's one that kind of does. So this is attempting to show, yes, there's a landscape here and there's a longitudinal flow of material. There's definitely exchange with the lateral exchange with the riparian corridor, but then there's a lot of vertical exchange too. In the circles here, you see hyporheic exchange zones where nutrients and material and energy and organisms are mixing with each other. If you put all these together, you kind of get these FPZs, functional process zones, little patches in the river that are always kind of shifting and changing. So that's the most advanced way of thinking about a river. It's really difficult to show in one diagram because it's trying to show all those axes happening at the same time. Okay, so you might think, do stream ecosystems go through succession? Since we've talked a lot about succession in this class, does that adaptive cycle apply to streams? At first glance, you might think it might not, because maybe you think streams don't really have disturbances and they don't really go through reorganization and growth and conservation phase. But they do. Yes, both of these things, succession and adaptive cycle, really apply to streams just like they apply to any other ecosystem. The main disturbance, of course, in streams are floods or times of really high flow. And the stages of succession can be thought of in terms of something called processing length. So let's take a look at processing length. Here is a kind of detailed diagram of a leaf that enters a stream. So here's a leaf entering the stream, and it gets wet, and then it's floating down the stream, and some material leaches out of it as dissolved organic matter, and microbial organisms colonize it, and they start to break it down with enzymes, and so some of that carbon is released to CO2, and then some invertebrates colonize it and start to chew it up and release some of that as CO2 and poop some of it out so that now it's fine particulate organic matter. And then finally we get down to fragments that are mostly passed through the bodies of other organisms already. So that leaf went from being a whole leaf to something that doesn't even look like a leaf anymore. It's been processed, we say. And that took some time. There's time across the bottom here, and there's also distance because this thing is floating down the stream as it goes. So really efficient streams that are have lots of niches filled and really sort of late conservation phase, have short processing length, which means that a leaf doesn't have to float very far. There's so many things in that stream that want to chew it, and there's so many tight linkages between organisms. It doesn't have to go very far until it's pretty well broken down. Streams that don't have very good linkages between niches and they don't have very good diversity, that leaf might float for many miles and not really be processed. So we use processing length as a way of measuring the succession state of streams. Here's a couple glimpses of some figures from a paper that sort of gets at this idea of stream processing. So here's the basic idea of processing length. A chunk of leaf or whatever falls into the river. And this is showing its biomass. Actually, the biomass goes up at first, which seems weird because bacteria are colonizing it, and it actually takes on biomass. But then it starts to lose biomass as it gets processed. And as we go down the stream here, you might say we're going down numbers of meters from wherever it entered. And so now we're up to 120, 140 meters, and pretty much that leaf is getting processed. So that's the processing length. The idea of this concept is that in late conservation phase or late successional phase, all the different parts of the stream, the riparian corridor and the parafluvial zone and the hyporheic zone and the surface stream, are all pretty well connected with each other. So that processing length is really tight. It's really short. Like I said, lots of organisms, lots of niches filled, really quick processing and processing length. The telescope here is kind of all pushed together. When you get a minor disturbance, like a little flood, the processing length increases. The leaf is going to float farther down the stream and before it gets totally processed. That makes sense. But then as the flood recedes, the telescope comes back together and the processing length shifts. When you get a major flood, like a monsoon, that processing length can get very long. But if all of these parts of the river, hyporheic, parafluvial, riparian, surface stream, are all well connected and have lots of diversity, that processing length can shrink back pretty quickly. These bottom diagrams are trying to show you the same thing in graphs. So when you get a minor disturbance, processing length increases, and then it slowly comes back. In streams that are well cross-linked, in other words, all the parts of the stream are well connected, and the organisms are interacting with each other, it comes back pretty quickly. If not, it might come back pretty slowly. When you get a major disturbance, a major flood, some streams recover their processing length pretty quickly and some don't. So this is an interesting idea, and it's a way to measure how well streams function, is how well do they process organic detritus as it floats down the stream. And you can imagine something like a canal that humans dug, which has very little diversity, very little things living. It's just conveying water. The processing length might be almost infinite because there's nothing in that stream or that little canal to process carbon. We're going to hear about that on Friday because Charlie is going to give us a little presentation on the Kissimmee River in Florida and talk to us a little bit about how that river has changed over the last century or so. Really well-linked streams that have been left in their natural state, in other words, not channelized or not, they don't have flood walls and things like that, usually have a pretty short processing length. Okay, good. So now you understand about some terms of streams and some models of conceptual ideas of streams and the concept of processing length, which is pretty important. I want to tell you about your stream ecology lab assignment. So this is Wednesday, and this is going to be due next Wednesday, so I'll give you a week to do this. And here's how we're going to do this. It's going to be due in two parts, actually just due in one part, but it's going to have two components, a field component and an online component. And you will get to choose how you want to do this. So I realize some of you have access to a stream. You could go out to a stream either that's near you or you can drive to it. And some of you, that's not a possibility right now. And so I understand that. So you'll need to look at both parts of this, but you will be able to, depending on your circumstances, will decide whether you want to maximize one of these and minimize the other or reverse that. I'll explain. Okay, so the field component, if we were all together on a normal semester, we would all be going out and sloshing around in some streams, but I realize you can't all do that. Some of you might want to though. So on Notebowl in the document section, I have posted a stream field evaluation form that the Ohio EPA uses. Called the QHEI form. So find that. It has a score sheet on the first page. This is one of those ecological integrity indices that we talked about in class. It adds up to 100 points. It has a whole bunch of categories, and you kind of score a stream based on what you see or what you can measure. And then you give it an overall score to give it a grade, kind of, to see how well that stream is doing. It has 8 pages of descriptions and instructions that come with that form. So if you're a person that wants to maximize this field idea and you have safe and easy access to a small stream near you, so don't go to a major river here. This index is designed for a first, second, third order stream, something fairly small that you could wade in if you wanted to. If you want to do that and you have a way to visit a stream, read the instructions and then complete that score sheet for the stream that you visit. And then when you do that, provide me with a written summary, a paragraph or two of the scores that you gave. What score did you give in each category and why did you choose that? And then what was the overall score that you gave for that stream? And then give me some photos of the stream that you visited. Make at least one a selfie so I know that you were there at that stream. Put all that on one Word document and that would be your field component for this part of the lab. If you are not able to go to a stream or you just don't want to, you can minimize this part. So how you minimize it is you're going to look at the same document and just read it. Read and look at the score sheet and read the 8 pages about how it works and how things are assigned scores, and give me a 1-paragraph description of how this ecological integrity index works. So for example, what is awarded more points and why? What sort of stream would get a high or low overall score and why? So you're really just sort of writing about how this Ohio EPA field index works, and you don't have to go get your feet muddy at all if you don't want to. That's fine. The other part to this is an online component. And for this, I'm going to have you look at something called, it's a website that's called How's My Waterway that the US EPA has put together. So if you want to maximize this, in fact, if you didn't go to visit a stream in person, you will need to maximize this part. And the way you'll do that is you're going to visit this website called How's My Waterway. There's the, I bet you can just Google How's My Waterway, but there's the URL if you want it. And then read the About section to learn how it works. And then choose a location and show map. You can click through those things, and you can choose any location in the United States you want, maybe where you are right now or someplace else, it doesn't matter. And then click on an actual stream, and you will get to a part where it will show you the technical report for that stream. So your job would be to take a look at that technical report, give me a screenshot of the stream that you chose, and then read its technical report and give me a little paragraph description of the condition of that stream. So you might say, oh, the stream is really polluted because it has this, this, and this going on, or this stream was found to be in really good shape because it has high diversity and it has abundant fish and good recreation possibilities and so on. So if you're maximizing this online part, do this for 2 other streams. You can choose them from different regions or the same, but make sure at least one is a polluted stream. They show up in red on these maps, the ones that are polluted in some way. So you're going to do a total of 3 screenshots and 3 paragraphs for this, and put these on your Word document along with your minimized field paragraph on the field component. If you are a person that did the full field visit and you went out and got wet and muddy, good for you. So if you did that in full, you can minimize this online part. So to do that, you're going to go to the same website, the My Waterway, and read about, and then choose a location that you're interested in and click on a stream and take a look at it. And then just give me a 1-paragraph summary on how this ranking system works, and add that paragraph to your field data report. Okay. So this is due 1 week from now on April 1, and I'll make a spot on Notebowl where you can upload this. So what you're going to submit is going to be a single Word document, and yours will have either the maximum field stuff. In other words, you went out in the field and did the scoring form and told me how you did that and gave me some photos, at least one selfie, and the minimum online thing, which is just a paragraph, or you chose to do the minimum field thing, which is just a paragraph, and the maximum online thing, which is 3 different looks at different streams and a short explanation of the condition of that stream. Okay, so I'm trying to give you options here. So some of you can go outside if you want to and you have that capacity, but you don't have to if you don't have that capacity or just want to stay inside. That's fine too. So this is due by the end of the day on Wednesday, April 1 on Notebowl in a spot I will call Streamlab. So you can email me questions if you have trouble with that, but hopefully you can figure it out. Either you'll be doing this sort of thing out in a stream, measuring some things and taking some notes on what you see and scoring some things, or you will be mostly looking at web pages and looking at streams on there. Whatever you do is fine with me. Ask me questions as you need, and make sure you stay coronavirus free. Be well, and I will talk to you again on Friday.